All right, let's talk to Travis from Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Hi, Travis. Welcome.
Hi, Steve. I'm curious if you're familiar with Leonard Ravenhill, and if so, like, what are your thoughts on him? Like, criticisms or just things that you liked about him?
Well,
what's your perspective on him?
I think he was mostly an evangelist. I remember just when I was a teenager, a friend of mine had a book of his sermons and would often quote from him, and he seemed pretty cool. He was a pretty uncompromising guy, you know. Kind of funny, too. Used some alliteration in his sermons. He eventually was living in Texas and was a friend of Keith Green. I never knew Leonard, but I knew Keith. And Keith was pretty influenced by him. But Keith was likewise a pretty hardline guy. Both Leonard Ravenhill and Keith were very hardline preachers. And I think we need those. I'm a little less like that myself, but I can't claim that that I'm deeply immersed in Ravenhill's material so as to really be able to analyze it or assess it for its value. But I've heard some of his years ago sermons on tape, and again, a lot of his written stuff. He used to also write articles for Keith Green's Last Days newsletter. I'd read those too. But all I can say is I've never had any objection to him. It's possible that in some of the sermons or writings that I've never encountered of his, he might have said things I would not agree with. I don't know. But I've never had any objection to him. Is there anything that makes you wonder?
Well, I very much appreciate him. He's like one of my favorite preachers. I know that on Matthew 7:13, like it's not in there. Nobody's asked about him. One thing that I saw somebody criticizing, and I didn't know my take on it because I might be biased and I might just be trying to justify him. But some people will criticize him because they'll say like, "Oh God," or "My God, where are we?" or stuff like that. And they'll say using the name of the Lord in vain, or it's not reverence toward God.
I would say with some people, when they say "Oh God" or "My God," it's clear that they're not speaking to God. But a preacher, a gospel preacher, who says "My God" or whatever, I don't know that he's not speaking to God. If you're speaking to God, say "Oh God" or "My God" is not a blasphemy. And I'm not really sure it's even a blasphemy when people are using it just as an expletive. It's just not right. I mean, it may be a different kind of a sin than a blasphemy. I don't think it's blasphemous to call on the name of God, even if you're rather not thinking very deeply about talking to God. I think that it's a rather irreverent use of the name when it's in the lips of someone who's not a godly person, because they're clearly not calling on God in sincerity. But I don't know that I've heard Ravenhill ever do that in a way that I thought was, anything other than sincere. I mean, people who know God and walk with God cry out to God and speak to God quite extemporaneously through the day, and I don't know.
If
he says "My God,"
the context I'm thinking of, I have one sermon in mind. He's doing it in like shock, kind of like where are we as the church with all this stuff to feed on. Where he's talking about like the bankruptcy of the church's spirituality, and he's saying, "My God, where are we?" So that's the context.
Well, that'd be in that context. It sounds like he could be very well speaking to God. God, what's going on here? Yeah, I would say to pure, all things are pure. I mean, certainly anyone can use the name God or Lord, whether they mean it sincerely or whether they're using it as a expletive. But I think a man with a pure heart would be using it in an unobjectionable way. So I wouldn't have any problem with that.
Absolutely, well, I appreciate it.
All right, brother. God bless you. Thanks for your call.